Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. To have a really cool review for you guys from the brand WM Watch or Wrist Moment, which was not too long ago rebranded from Welly Merrick. So if you kind of recognize the branding there, they are known as an Asian OEM or original equipment manufacturer, or ODM, original design manufacturer and producer, basically turned into a factory brand. So they were already essentially creating cases and bracelets and etc. For other brands, and essentially they decided, hey, let's start making our own brand. So this is what we have here today. In terms of the type of watch, this is an everyday watch. Some key common characteristics and design which around something you can wear every day. Of course, you're going to want that versatile blend of both sporty and dressy attributes. This is known as their luxury style sweeping quartz watch, the WM207, and it's essentially an homage remix combining Rolex and Grand Seiko design elements into a hyper affordable package. Hyper affordable, yes, guys, under $100 even at full price of $99.80, but it is on sale currently for $69.86. Yes, this is one of the cheapest analog watches I've ever featured on the channel. This was sent in kindly by WM Watch, free of charge for this review, and it is a cool looking watch. It basically kind of combines that Oyster perpetual style case and handset with a white birch bark inspired dial, and of course those Evo 9 style indices also from Grand Seiko. Now this, of course, being a watch that costs well under $100, isn't going to be competitive with those watches in terms of execution, but in terms of style and overall package, I do have to say that, from a lot of objective points, considering that you're going to be getting, still stainless steel, you're going to still be getting a sapphire crystal, you're even getting this really cool quartz movement that some of you are noticing is having a nice little sweep to it. This is actually a Seiko Mecha Quartz movement, the VH31, which actually beats at 2 hertz, about half of the 4 hertz sweep that you would be typically used to, and 1 step below the 3 hertz sweep that you would typically see on a Seiko. So this is beating at 14,400 vibrations per hour, which is going to be about 4 beats per second, versus your typically standard 8 beats per second or 6 beats per second when you're thinking about 3 or 4 hertz. And these are actually pretty accurate, not a high accuracy quartz, but pretty accurate at plus or minus 15 seconds per month, which is going to be a lot more accurate than most mechanicals. So with that said, let's go ahead and zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, let's take a closer look. As you can see, very cool dial. I'd say that's probably the star of the show here. It's the more subtle birch bark style, which is actually on even more expensive versions of the white birch dials than you're used to in terms of just that Evo 9. So I think it's really done quite subtly. It does have that kind of pale silvery opaline like tone, which I do like. It's going to render pretty visually white in most situations, but you guys can see up close upon deeper examination, you're going to have, of course, a lot of those shimmery silvery tones. Now, in terms of the dimensions here, I think it's a winner, especially for smaller wrists at 36 millimeters across, 9.5 millimeters thin, so very nice from that perspective. And then only 43.7 millimeters lug to lug, full 316L stainless steel construction, brushed with some polished accents. You can see, of course, you're going to have that Oyster style case, the Oyster style bracelet. That end link is not the greatest in terms of the quality and looking at it, but it's also not terrible. So the nice thing is this is going to look great on a strap. I actually plan to swap it out to a strap here when I'm done with this review, because my daughter really likes this watch. Now, when it comes to the crystal, you're getting a flat sapphire with an inner AR coating, so really nice there in terms of visibility and, of course, protection against scratches. You're getting a push-pull crown, which is signed, and, not everybody signs their crown, so nice little detail there that they didn't have to do, especially at this price point. Now, the movement inside here, although you can't see it thanks to this very sterile case back there, which is nice and flat though, and does help keep that very thin profile, is going to be this movement known as the Quartz Seiko Instruments, or Seiko Instruments Incorporated, or SII VH VH31. And the cool thing is this has a 2-year power reserve, right? Because we're talking about the battery life. 2 years isn't super long. That is one of my drawbacks when it comes to Mecha Quartz movements from Seiko, because of course, that higher beat in terms of, having more ticks per second does tend to wear down the batteries faster. But the nice part is you get this nice smooth sweep. Now, no, it's not quite as smooth, but if you were to compare this to, let's say, some vintage watches that are even fully mechanical, this is actually pretty comparable with that 2 hertz sweep. Again, 14,400 vibrations per hour in terms of the beat rate, which is going to be 4 beats per second. It is accurate, again, to plus or minus 15 seconds per month, right? Which is pretty great, especially considering a lot of mechanical watches are closer to about plus or minus 15 seconds per day. Now, in terms of the dial, you're getting that birch bark textured pale silver opaline white dial. You have applied indices, which are pretty nicely done. Let me try to get it to reflect there. Of course, net right when it's headed like this, it's reflecting off of a black camera lens. So I'll try to have it at an angle where you guys can see now. Although they are very similar in terms of their overall shape to something like from a Grand Seiko, clearly they wouldn't be executed to the same level. So I'm not trying to, oversell this by any means. I think it is still nicely appointed though, especially at the price point. Like, it doesn't look like this is the cheapest version that they could have done. I feel like they could have gone much cheaper with the execution, especially at this price point, and they still decided to go a couple of notches above that. So, I'm okay with that. Now, the hands are polished in terms of the hour, minute, and seconds. And then the hour and minute hand do also have lume, which is going to be your Super Luminova C3. But you can see it's a very thin sliver that's applied there, so expectations can't be super high. A nice feature here is you're getting 10 bar or 100 meters of water resistance, guys. So for an everyday piece, especially a quartz powered piece, that's going to really help tone things up, especially when you consider that you are getting, again, that scratch resistant sapphire crystal. The lug width here is a bit of a downer. I wish they would have went with 20 millimeter. They went with 19 millimeter, although 19 millimeter is better than 21 millimeter. 19 millimeter is far from optimal. I'm glad that they didn't go 18 millimeter, because I feel like 18 millimeter would have made this watch wear a little bit too small for larger wrists. So I'm okay with the fact that they did go with 19 millimeter in this case. And I do have a couple of 19 millimeter straps, luckily, and a few that are really short length, so that, again, my daughter can wear this one with some relative ease. Now, the bracelet is going to be that solid Oyster style 3-link. You're getting solid male end links there, split pin construction, which at this price point is going to be, pretty much to be expected. You are getting a 1 millimeter taper there. And I will say, for the smaller size, if you have a smaller wrist, you might be looking for a more dramatic taper. But for me, with a larger wrist, I don't mind it having that more mild taper, because it just gives you a little bit more wrist presence if you do have a larger wrist. Again, now, and then of course, this is going to look great on straps, as of course, as long as you have a 19 millimeter, lug width strap ready to go. So, the clasp itself was actually another nice surprise. Well, a lot of brands will just do kind of a knockoff flip-lock clasp and execute it very, very poorly. I can appreciate that WM actually just put on a really nice fully milled push button, right, clasp. Like, this is great. It has a nice bevel there, nicely signed. It does have, of course, about 6 positions of manual micro adjustment there to really dial in the fit. And again, I'm not mad at this. I would much rather have something that is going to be functionally executed to a higher level, so that it improves wearability, versus something that's just, looking like a really, really cheap version of something more expensive. I'd rather have a good version of something that is, a more attainable and approachable design, which you're going to get with this push button, setup here with the fully milled scissor. And then, very simple and straightforward in terms of its connecting points there with, just using basic spring bars. So I dig that. And it also means that in terms of when you look at the kind of thickness and everything, it feels quite balanced. But speaking of the balance, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, I think this wears really well. Of course, for comfort purposes, it would have been nice to have a bit of more dramatic taper. But I think, of course, with my larger wrist and the smaller diameter on this particular watch, it's nice to kind of have a little bit of just more wrist presence there. And as you guys can also notice, of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, it's just going to make the watch seem a lot larger. But thankfully, this is a small watch, so even up close, and when it's, you know, really distorting your perspective in terms of how large this watch actually is and the way that it sits on my wrist, you know, it's still pretty nicely sized, which again isn't probably another reason, you know, indirectly why smaller watches are really in style, because they're also easier to photograph for things like Instagram. But if I get my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame like so, you guys will notice that you're going to see a much truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist, where it's going to be a lot more centered. You're going to see a lot more of course, the drape of the bracelet falling to either side of the wrist. You can see, of course, with that Oyster style case, just beautifully contoured, you know, very nicely done. Not to a luxury level or anything like that, but it absolutely does the job. And again, it doesn't leave me, especially at the price point, it doesn't leave me, you know, wishing for any more. I think, you know, this is more than delivering on the overall value proposition here. You can see it's just clean. It sits very nicely on the wrist. I'm more of a 38.5 millimeter, you know, watch wearer when it comes to a watch with a smaller bezel and a larger dial. Of course, if it's a diver watch, you know, 40 is a pretty good sweet spot. 41, 42, also 39, 38, depending on the play on the proportions of that dial to bezel ratio. But when it comes to, you know, a nice open dial like this with a relatively svelte bezel, you can see very nicely contoured there, very nice and round, highly polished. So it just does give you that little bit of an elevated look in terms of adding a feeling of, you know, expense to the overall experience. And you guys can see, I think that looks quite nice. Look at how thin and flat that sits. Of course, thanks to the smaller diameter, you know, if this watch was like a 41 millimeter, you'd be saying it's ultra thin at 9.5 millimeters. But of course, it's just really well balanced at this point. 9.5 millimeters in terms of thickness is a very nice thickness, which is going to absolutely be able to slide underneath any cuff. You know, for more dressy types of situations or anything like that. But with that said, let's actually get it off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, not much loom to report back, but it is there if you need it. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be that bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And you guys can see here, this is where this one comes to life. That very nice texturing there, quite balanced, not overly done. And honestly, if it was overly done, it probably wouldn't have been executed this good. So I like that, you know, WM found that sweet spot, right? They did something that's a little bit more complex, but still within their wheelhouse, so where they could execute it at a nice level. So I think that looks very clean. And again, it looks like bark, which is great, right? Which is kind of the whole point in terms of that design. I think that renders very clearly, and that's again a reason why my daughter liked this watch. She said it looks like it has a wooden dial. It looks like bark. So I thought that that was really cool, especially that, you know, she's not super into watches. She doesn't understand that, you know, like we're a little more cynical. We hear about certain types of dials and we automatically assume all of the different inspirational points and storylines that Grand Seiko is going to kind of throw out there for a marketing perspective. But it is cool to see something where I think it is pretty straightforward in terms of the execution, the inspiration, and how it came out all together. Now, in terms of closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, very comfortable and competent. Ooh. Oh, excuse me. And thank you for those of you that blessed me down in the comments. In terms of the thinness, it's really nice, and it does help that 36 millimeter case with wear flatter against the wrist, which not only, you know, it just helps that, you know, for me, 36 millimeters, it can be small, right? And this helps it not feel overly small on my larger than average wrist. So I really like that. So that thinness pays off, although you're not wearing this thinking, oh, I'm wearing this as some super thin watch, because in terms of the proportions, it's still quite nice and it feels quite proportional versus feeling like some super svelte, super thin type of setup. Now, in terms of comparable models, guys, I'm not too well versed in VH31 powered pieces, but I'm, you know, sure that there are similar competitors out there from like brands within the price point. Let me know down in the comment section if you have any in particular that you'd like me to check out in the future, or you think that pair well against something like this at this price point. So for me, guys, bottom line, for well under $100, you're getting a ton of objective value here. Sure, subjectively, the styling and execution may be on the more specific side in terms of, you know, shoppers and what they're looking for, but at about $70, it's really hard to feel bad about any of its perceived shortcomings. So let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like, and if you're not already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.